The life of a taxi driver can sometimes show you some very strange things. Story 1. It was just after 2 in the morning, the kind of hour when the world feels paused, quiet, and a little too still. I was driving along an old, half-forgotten road just outside the city limits. Most drivers avoided that stretch. No lights, no houses, just cracked asphalt winding through woods that whispered with every gust of wind. I was about to call it a night when I saw her, standing by the roadside in the beam of my headlights. A woman, dressed in white, her arm lifted slowly, thumb pointing upward, not quite a wave, not quite a signal. Something in me hesitated, but I pulled over. The passenger door opened with a soft creak, and she stepped inside without a word, just nodded. I asked where she was heading. Her voice was quiet, barely above a whisper, as she gave me an address I didn't recognize. As soon as she sat down, I noticed it. The temperature dropped, not gradually, instantly, like the air itself had thickened with frost. I checked the dashboard, thinking I had cranked the air conditioning by mistake, but everything was off. And yet, the cold remained, heavy, unnatural. I glanced at her in the mirror, trying not to stare. She didn't look at me, just stared out the window, her expression calm, detached. We drove in silence, no music, no city sounds. Just the hum of the tires and the occasional flicker of trees rushing past. Her stillness started to feel heavier than the quiet. At one point, I looked up and noticed the fog had rolled in, dense and low, making the headlights nearly useless. And yet, she didn't seem bothered. We reached the address. I pulled up to the side of the road and turned slightly to let her know we'd arrived. "We're here," I said. No reply. I looked back fully, and the seat was empty. No sound, no door opening, no chill on the air anymore, just gone. My heart hammered. I stepped out of the car, circled around, half expecting to see her walking away into the fog. But the road was deserted, completely. I double-checked the address she gave me, typed it into the GPS again. The marker blinked back, City Cemetery. I didn't stay to ask questions. I got back in the car, locked the doors, and drove off with my hands shaking on the wheel. To this day, I don't know who she was or what she wanted. But every time I drive past that road now, I keep my eyes straight ahead, because I've learned something. Not every passenger you pick up is really looking for a ride. Story 2. It was sometime past 3 in the morning when the request came through, an unusual pickup from the industrial zone on the far edge of town. That area is a ghost town after dark. Rows of old warehouses, factories with flickering lights, and the smell of rust lingering in the air. Most drivers ignore calls from there, but I was behind on hours and figured I'd take the risk. When I pulled up, there he was, standing perfectly still beneath a broken street lamp. Tall, broad-shouldered, wearing a dark coat and a wide-brimmed hat that shadowed most of his face. He opened the rear door, sat down silently, and didn't say a word. I cleared my throat, trying to sound casual. "Where to?" His answer came slow, almost like an echo. "Just drive, straight. No address, no explanation." Something in the way he said it made the air feel heavier. But I nodded and started moving. The moment we left that zone, I noticed something strange. Every traffic light we passed turned green before we even reached it. One after the other, no red, no stops. It was like the city was making way for us. But that wasn't the weirdest part. The streets were empty, not just quiet, empty. No late-night buses, no delivery vans, not even a single pedestrian. It felt like we were the only ones awake, or the only ones there. The farther we drove, the more distorted time began to feel. I kept checking the clock on the dashboard, but it seemed stuck. Minutes stretched like hours. Outside the windows, familiar buildings started looking unfamiliar, like distorted copies of places I should recognize. I was gripping the wheel so tight my knuckles ached. I thought about pulling over, but every time I glanced at him in the mirror, I felt a chill crawl up my spine. He never moved, never blinked, just stared forward as if he was waiting for something. Then, without warning, he spoke again. "You can stop here." His voice was softer now, almost distant. I eased the car to a halt, turned around to ask if he was sure, and that's when I saw it. The seat was empty, no door had opened, no footsteps, no sound. Just me, alone, parked in the middle of a dark street I didn't recognize. I scrambled to check the GPS, thinking maybe I dropped a pin by accident, but the screen was blank. No route, no history, like I hadn't gone anywhere at all. I sat there for a long time, engine idling, trying to make sense of what just happened. My hands were trembling. When I finally pulled away, I drove straight home and didn't take another ride that night. I've never seen that man again, but sometimes when I'm passing that part of the city in the dead of night, I check the rearview mirror, just in case someone's there. Quiet, watching, waiting for another ride to nowhere. The rain was relentless that night, one of those downpours that seems to wash the whole city clean, leaving the streets glossy and empty. My shift was nearly over, and I was more than ready to head home, but something caught my eye as I turned onto a side street near the edge of downtown. There, under a flickering street lamp, stood a boy, soaked from head to toe, hair plastered to his forehead, his small frame trembling in the cold. He couldn't have been more than 10 years old. No umbrella, no coat, just standing there like he'd been waiting for someone or something. I pulled over and rolled the window down just enough to ask if he was okay. He didn't answer, just looked at me with eyes too calm for a night like that and asked if I could take him to an address in a neighborhood far outside the city. Something about his voice, soft, emotionless, made my stomach twist. But I unlocked the door. He climbed into the back seat without a word. Water dripped from his clothes onto the seat, and the air inside the car turned cold and still, like the rain had followed him in. I started driving, every now and then glancing at him in the mirror. He just stared straight ahead. The silence was uncomfortable, but I felt like I had to say something. "Do your parents know where you are?" I asked, keeping my tone light. He waited a few seconds before answering, and when he did, it was quiet, too quiet. "They will, soon." That was all, no follow-up, no emotion. I didn't know what to say to that, so I just kept driving. The neighborhood he mentioned was one I hadn't visited in years. Old homes, large lots, far from any main roads. As we approached the street, I noticed how dark everything felt, like the rain had swallowed even the streetlights. "Right there," he said suddenly, pointing toward a small, run-down house on the corner. "That's where I used to live, before the fire." His words landed heavy, like stones in water. I turned to ask what he meant, if he was okay, if he needed help, but the back seat was empty. No door had opened, no sound, just the faint drip of rain from the car roof. I blinked, confused, and looked at the house again. Its windows were black, the roof half collapsed. Charred wood lined the walls like scars. It had clearly been abandoned for years, burned out and forgotten. I stepped out into the rain, walked toward the gate, hoping, somehow, to make sense of what had just happened. But the silence only deepened. No boy, no footprints, just a lingering cold and the sound of water running through the gutter. I got back in the car, soaked and shaken, and drove off without logging the ride. To this day, I don't know who that child was, but every time it rains like that, I check the sidewalks, wondering if he's still out there, waiting for another ride home to a place that no longer exists. Story 4. It was one of those heavy summer nights, thick air, still sidewalks, and a sky that looked like it hadn't breathed in hours. Just after midnight, I got a request through the app. Pick up in front of an old church downtown. The place had history, the kind that clings to brick like dust you can't sweep off. Most of that part of the city goes dark after sundown. Businesses shuttered, streetlights flickering like dying fireflies. Still, I accepted the ride. I needed one more before calling it a night. When I pulled up, the church steps were dim, but not empty. There, sitting alone beneath the archway, was a woman. She was wearing a long, white dress, no doubt about it, a wedding dress. Satin soaked in shadow, edges slightly wrinkled, as if she'd been sitting there for a long, long time. A veil rested over her dark hair, delicate lace trailing past her shoulders. She wasn't crying, she wasn't panicking, she just sat, still as the stone beneath her. I rolled down the window and asked, "Did you order a ride?" She didn't reply, just stood, slow and deliberate, and stepped into the back seat. Her movements were fluid, almost too smooth, like she was gliding instead of walking. The moment the door clicked shut, the air inside the car changed. It became dense, not just warm, oppressive, like the oxygen had thinned, like I had to work harder to breathe. I asked her destination. She didn't answer. Instead, she reached into her dress and handed me a folded piece of paper. On it, a single address. I recognized the street. It was far off, in one of the city's oldest residential zones. But I'd never dropped anyone there that late before. Still, I nodded, entered it into the GPS, and pulled away from the church. As we drove, the streets got quieter. No headlights in either direction. No people. No movement at all. Even the usual late-night glow of neon signs seemed dimmed, like the city was asleep or hiding. I kept checking the rearview mirror. She was just sitting there, eyes locked on the window, watching her own reflection. Her expression was unreadable, blank but heavy. The kind of sadness that doesn't need tears to be loud. I tried to break the silence once or twice, asked if she was okay, but she didn't flinch, didn't blink. Just sat there with the kind of calm that doesn't belong to someone who's waiting, but to someone who's already lost. The ride stretched on in a strange way. The clock on the dash barely moved, even though the engine purred beneath us. I felt like I was driving in place, like the streets were looping. When we finally pulled up to the house, the place looked wrong, like time had forgotten it. The address matched, but everything else felt off. The lawn was overgrown, the paint on the siding cracked and flaking, windows covered with wooden boards as if the house had been abandoned for years. Before I could ask anything, her voice broke the silence. Soft, low, almost too faint to hear. This is where he promised he'd come for me, but he never did. Her words were ice. I turned around instinctively, startled by the sudden sound. The back seat was empty. No sound of a door opening, no footsteps, no flutter of the veil, just gone. I froze. My eyes scanned the area. Nothing. Not a soul on the street. Not a single trace of her. But there was something. A faint scent in the air, sweet, floral, like lilies left too long in the sun. It hovered in the space she had occupied. I looked at the house again, and that's when it hit me. This wasn't just an old house. This was the house. The one I'd heard rumors about. The one that had been abandoned since the early 1980s, after a bride-to-be took her own life the night her fiancé never showed up. The next morning, still shaken, I asked around. An elderly man running a newspaper stand near the area confirmed it. The church, the house, the dress. It had all happened decades ago. And every few years, someone, always a driver, reports seeing her again, waiting, hoping, repeating that last journey to a place frozen in heartbreak. I never picked up a ride near that church again, and I always check the rearview mirror, just in case she decides to finish her final ride once more.